Read Smart, the Baillie Gifford Prize podcast. This podcast is generously sponsored by the Blavatnik Family Foundation.
Hello and welcome everyone to Read Smart, the Baillie Gifford Prize's podcast, where we meet the authors of the 6 brilliant books shortlisted for the Non-Fiction Award 2025. As always, we're very grateful to the Blavatnik Family Foundation for its generous support of this podcast. In this episode, we're counting down to the announcement of the winner at a ceremony on the 4th of November, and we have a special guest whose work electrifies. I'm delighted to be joined by Frances Wilson, the critic, biographer, and all-round literary detective, whose latest book, Electric Spark, The Enigma of Muriel Spark, has lit up the shortlist. Frances is no stranger to the Baillie Gifford Prize. In fact, she's a great friend of it. Her biography, Guilty Thing, A Life of Thomas de Quincey, which longlisted in 2016, while her acclaimed book Burning Man, The Ascent of D.H. Lawrence, made the longlist in 2021. And she sat on the other side of the table too, serving as a hard-working judge for the prize in 2019, and then again on the panel to choose the prize's winner of winners in 2023 to mark our 25th anniversary. Now, in Electric Spark, Frances has gone one step further, securing a place on this year's shortlist. Electric Spark is far from a conventional biography. Rather, it's a dazzling investigation into the life and mind of Muriel Spark, a poet and novelist, Catholic convert, and master of literary mischief. In this book, Frances Wilson doesn't just recount Spark's story, she decodes it, tracing the cryptic clues scattered across her life and her fiction. From her wartime propaganda work to amphetamine-fueled breakdowns, from betrayal to reinvention, the book reveals a woman who lived as she wrote, with precision, provocation, and with a touch of the Gothic. So, Frances, thank you very, very much for joining us, and congratulations on being shortlisted for the prize.
Thank you so much, Toby. Thank you for having me.
It's a huge pleasure. So your work spans the lives of an eclectic range of writers, from D.H. Lawrence to Dorothy Wordsworth, from De Quincey, now Muriel Spark. How do you choose your subject? Is there anything that all these people have in common?
Well, I like difficult people, and I like difficult people in my life as well as in my work. I'm drawn to their trickiness or their tricksiness, and I'm also drawn to their voices. If there's something that I can't quite tune into in the written voice, then that's a magnet for me. And this was particularly the case with Muriel Spark, who described her own writing process as tuning into voices in the air. She was an auditory writer, and so I found I was really drawn to her.
And your book, Electric Spark, reveals Spark's life as almost as puzzling and eventful as her novels. How did it help you understand her life?
Well, her first published book was a biography of Mary Shelley. It was published in 1950, and she described Mary Shelley's being blackmailed after Shelley's death, being blackmailed by someone who got hold of her love letters to someone that she'd met as a widow. Spark was very exercised by this, not least because she was fascinated by blackmail and saw Western civilization as principally a kind of blackmail plot. And blackmail plots run through all her novels. But then, extraordinarily, a blackmail plot fell into her life as well, when her own love letters to her previous boyfriend and collaborator, Derek Stanford, ended up in the hands of an unscrupulous book dealer in America, and he tried to blackmail her with those. And so it was, very, very uncanny. But, the uncanniness continues. If she wrote about a couple being struck by lightning, she too would be struck by lightning. If she wrote about someone being burgled, she too would be burgled. But I think the most extraordinary connection is that her first novel, The Comforters, which was published in 1957, was about a Catholic convert, as Spark was herself, finding herself, she's had a breakdown, and as Spark did herself during her conversion, and she believed that she was being turned into a fictional figure. So she heard invisible typewriters tapping away in the room. She thought she was being turned into a fictional figure in someone's book. Now, in 1990, Spark invited her first biographer, Martin Stannard, into her life, and then complained that she was being turned by him into a fictional figure.
Wow.
And I'm sure this was very unconscious. But yes, she was fascinated by plots. The plots got going in her novels and then repeated themselves in her life.
So she sounded very suitable to wartime propaganda work, really.
Yeah, she really was, and it was extraordinary that she landed in that job. So she'd spent most of the war in southern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and she'd left Scotland in 1937, aged 19, to get married to a man who she barely knew. When they arrived in Africa, she realized that he suffered from mental health issues and was violent. And she stayed in Africa much, much longer than she meant to, and managed to get out on a troop ship in 1944 and instantly started working for black propaganda. And nothing could have been a kind of better training ground for Muriel Spark, really, because it was what she was observing was truth with a little bit of fiction being threaded into it. So the newspaper articles being written which were 95% true and a little bit false. We're used to this now. This is what counts as the news now. But it was very it was unusual and very interesting work in 1944. And I think Spark was very inspired.
And yet this extraordinary and almost eccentric life was not really prefigured in her childhood, was it? You show in the book.
No, she had a very straightforward childhood, and it seems to have been very unusually a happy childhood. Although Spark makes plain in her own biographies when she wrote about Mary Shelley and Emily Bronte that she thought that too much maternal love smothered a writer, that it was much better for Mary Shelley that her mother had died in childbirth, and much better for Emily Bronte that she'd never known her mother. Her mother died when she was a young child. And so Spark spent as much time as she could kind of distancing herself from a family unit in order to turn herself into a writer of strength and magnificence. But her childhood seems to have been very settled, very safe. She had very loving parents. Her parents were of working class stock. She called them ordinary class. And they lived in a tenement flat that they rented in Edinburgh. And she had this fantastically good schooling at the school, which is then replicated in the prime of Miss Jean Brodie. And she had this fabulous teacher, Christina Kay, who was the model for Miss Jean Brodie. And it was Christina Kay who kind of gave her a university class education in literature, I think, and also taught Spark that she was destined to be a writer. And Spark took that very, very seriously. And what's interesting is why it took her so long to find her footing as a writer. She was a very good poet in the 40s and a very good biographer in the early 50s. But it took her until 1957 to discover that she was a novelist of genius.
Many biographers sort of struggle for source material or have to dig deeply for source material, but I think it's fair to say that this is not the case with Muriel Spark, is it?
She didn't struggle for source material. She returned to the ingredients of her life, but she did very, very interesting things with those ingredients. For example, she had very little interest in rounded character. In fact, she was actively against rounded character. And so she turned the figures that she'd met into types. She was really just interested in the type. And we can see this in her novels, that you get the type of the feckless, arrogant, talentless, mediocre man, and the type of the sassy woman. And so she wanted to do something very new and fresh with the novel, which meant getting rid of the unconscious in her characters. The 20th century novel had become very bogged down with a Freudian understanding of character, and she drained it of this. But all of her kind of, I'd say, bad experiences, and they were bad experiences in as much as her marriage was bad and her time in black propaganda, I think, must have been stimulating but very disturbing. And then this really turbulent period she had running the Poetry Society, where she was the only woman, deeply patronised. This all found its way into her novels as highly comic material in which these complicated people were reduced to kind of cartoon characters.
You also didn't struggle for source material when you were writing this biography. I mean, you said earlier before this recording that she kept a lot of material for her future biographers.
She kept way too much. I mean, when I say she was a hoarder, I mean that it was a pathology with her. She didn't throw anything away, ever. And so from 1947 onwards, she kept every single piece of paper that had ever passed her way. And there are two enormous Spark archives. One is in Edinburgh and the other is in Tulsa, and that I can't describe to you the size of them. It's just many, 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 many hundreds of feet of boxes of material, and she kept this obviously to frustrate biographers and critics in the future, but it's really interesting material to look at because she planted it with messages. And so you find on random pieces of paper a kind of a message to her future biographer or her future critic saying, "Don't believe what's written here."
Really? Oh my goodness. Just walk us through the moment, because obviously you'd done your research. You were probably prepared in theory for what you were going to find in these archives. But tell us about that first day or first morning when you walked into the room.
I had no idea what I was going to find in the archives. I didn't know what Spark's voice would sound like when it wasn't reduced and passed down in one of her novels. I mean, one of the interesting things about the archives is their size in contrast to the size of her novels. So her novels are kind of super slim. The books are as light as balsa wood because she was trained in the art of précis, and she saw her novels as poems, if you like. I mean, she described them as poems, and so she loved the idea of reduction. But when you look at the archives, you realise how much material had to be reduced for each book, and so it was interesting seeing Spark as a character of excess rather than a figure who was an expert in minimalism.
Yes.
And sometimes in some of the archive material, you just find nothing but anagrams or crossword puzzles or the same sentence repeated again and again and again and again on bits of paper that are cut in half.
Wow.
I've never seen a creative backdrop to a creative process as intriguing as hers.
What do you hope that readers will take away from Electric Spark?
Well, I hope readers will return to Spark with renewed vigour or discover Spark for the first time with real pleasure. I also hope that they'll see her as a really original and absolutely isolated figure, because there was no one else like her in 1950s England, and I was so moved by her aloneness as a writer.
Thank you for joining us, Frances, and very best of luck in the final round of the prize.
Thank you for having me.
As always, we'd like to thank the Blavatnik Family Foundation for its continued and very generous support of this podcast. The winner of the Baillie Gifford Prize 2025 will be announced on the 9th of November at an awards ceremony that is also generously supported by the Blavatnik Family Foundation. The announcement will be live streamed across the Baillie Gifford Prize for Nonfiction social media channels. If you're interested in finding out more about the shortlisted books, you can visit our website. You can follow us on X or Facebook or Instagram or TikTok at BG Prize. That's BG Prize. Thanks for listening. Until next time.
Read Smart, the Baillie Gifford Prize podcast. This podcast is generously sponsored by the Blavatnik Family Foundation.